Somebody made a comment on, I think, one of my rare books videos saying, I'd like to hear you just talk about books. So I thought that's what we would do now. I'll show you my home library. And along with me, apparently Nova is going to join us here. So over here on this side, this is right as soon as you walk into my home office. I've got everything separated by subject, and here it's done a bit unusually because this is all things I have relating to Asia and Russia and World War One and Two. There's a reason these are all together. It's all right, Nova. I had an idea for a novel. I think I discussed this in another video too. I've the only idea I have for a full, what I know would be a thick novel, bookend plot. The framework story would, you're going to hear my other cat out there too. The framework story revolves around a group of people in a Siberian gulag. Actually, it's more like a holding station after, it's when Joseph Stalin dies, 1953. 9 people sitting in a holding station. So there were these villages in Siberia where after some prisoners were released, they were basically would just live and work there like a prison without walls. So there's a campfire, and this mysterious girl shows up and sort of inspires 9 other people there to start telling stories, and they realize they have something in common. Maybe I should leave it at that. And anyways, that's why you see World War II and One mixed with Asia and Russia, because those things, as well as some other places, are tied together with that story. And so this is basically research material, but it's history. So I also read for pleasure, and it's opened some new doors for me too. Where do you start? We can go bottom up. Gulag Archipelago. For anybody who's not heard of this yet, this is the greatest trilogy ever written. Now I'm on record as having said that. It really is. This is from the perspective of the author, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who lived and worked in one of them in Kolyma in North Siberia, far North Siberia. You can see the thickness of these books too, or can you from here? The second one's twice as thick as the first one. And we'll get onto that. There's more Gulag stuff. Of course, I need that. It's a harrowing experience, of course. It's a journey to hell, but one you should take. And you'll know what I mean when you get there. It's just worth knowing about. Giving them your thoughts. And I have some other books of his too. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. Ivan, not Ivan. First Circle, Letter to Soviet Leaders. Where's the rest of my Russian stuff? Up here. Red Shambhala. This is Red Shambhala, Magic, Prophecy, and Geopolitics in the Heart of Asia by Andrei Znamensky. It's about magic and mysticism in Russia and some countries that were in the Soviet Union. And as much as it is about that, it also dispels some images of the same. More about Gulag here. So this author, Anne Applebaum, gave me everything I needed to know, whereas Solzhenitsyn's books are very full. It is one person's perspective from one gulag. Her books, Gulag and Red Famine and Iron Curtain, give you the full picture from different places. And, well, obviously the aftermath of World War II and Stalin's death and what happened after that. In the other two books, everything you could want to know about it, really. She's an incredible author. Vladimir Nabokov, the King, Queen, Knave, Nabokov's Quartet, and Transparent Things. I love this old 60s and 70s artwork, and we're going to come back to that in what I know already will be my next video. Look at this monster size Ada. Leo Tolstoy. War and Peace. That's video's very far away, isn't it? Show you that thickness. There's War and Peace. You see how thick that is? Now watch this. Another Tolstoy. Look at that. It just feels good to hold. Anna Karenina. This will perhaps be a controversial opinion, but I enjoyed Anna Karenina even more than War and Peace. And of course, you're going to have Russian literature, especially 19th century, you have to have Dostoevsky. So, Death of Ivan Ilyich, Crime and Punishment, House of the Dead, Notes from Underground, The Gambler, Bobok, and something called A Nasty Story. The Idiot. Do I have a favorite? He asked himself. Possibly. I don't know. Oh, I forgot to mention House of the Dead also. Can I hold these in a way that does not show a reflection? Maybe not. We'll see. If I have a favorite Dostoevsky, may very well be Notes from Underground. This includes another story called The Grand Inquisitor. More great old-time artwork. What's the publication date of this? 1960. Turgenev, First Love and Other Stories. All these authors I'm mentioning, these 19th century authors, and up through the first half of the 20th century, like Nabokov, you can't go wrong. You may like some stories better than others, but you can't go wrong. If you just take a chance on almost anything 19th century from Russia, you can't go wrong. So, of course, also we come to, did I mention Turgenev already? Fathers and Sons, probably his most famous. Why is this sticker still on? Anton Chekhov, collection of short stories. I picked this up at random. The Children of the Arbat by Anatoly Rybakov. And this is a novel. This is fiction set in the 1980s. And I got it exactly for that reason, because what I know about Russia in the 1980s is what I saw on the news here in North America. And I wanted a window into a time period and place that I know not much about, even if in the form of fiction. Boris Pasternak, Dr. Zhivago. I'll stop just reading them and start showing you more of them. More of this awesome 70s artwork. I think I'm going to have to say this comment repeatedly in this video. That the movie is pretty damn good. Is it as good as the book? Possibly, probably. It's awesome. And Pasternak, I thought I had more of his up here. Maybe not. I really thought I did, though. So this is an old copy. Nikolai Vasilievich Gogol, Dead Souls, probably his most famous work. I've got no cover to show you, except I'll show you the spine. You love those old spines as much as I do. I know you do. What is the publication date of this? This might have been so early that they did not even tell us when it was published. So many didn't do that. Aha. First edition was 1925. Wait a minute. It's time to put these on. I don't think you all have seen me with my glasses yet, but I've needed reading glasses for the last 3 years. First issue, 1915. This is reprinted 1927. More Nikolai Gogol short stories, and I bought this because I only knew Dead Souls and I wanted more, and I've not read that yet. What is this? Okay, The Fatal Eggs and Other Soviet Satire. Not a very popular thing, at least that you could discuss openly when the Soviet Union existed. All the more reason to have it and to lend more people your ears and your thoughts. Soviet satire from Soviets. What did I skip a whole row here? So far we've been in Russia. We didn't go to Asia at all yet, did we? Did I just represent all my Russian stuff fairly? Russian folktales. This is exactly what you would expect. It's, I think, published 1940s. Short versions of popular Russian folktales, including Baba Yaga. This book I also took a chance on. Anybody with even a passing interest in anything World War II, you want to hear about some important things going on during World War II in the background, but which was key and pivotal into the outcome. I recommend this. Information Hunters by Kathy Pice. When librarians, soldiers, and spies banded together in World War II Europe. Really, when England and America got together, librarians and people just who knew information and libraries got them together and had them just sort of push them to involvement in the war as spies. And it's incredible. Managed to somehow have a spirit of fun, I dare say, in part of it. So, back to the gulags for a moment. Don't fall. Diary of a Gulag Prison Guard, Ivan Chistyakov. This was written in the 1930s, and just like it says, he was a Gulag prison guard. This is awesome research and awesome just to read, just to know. The guy, by his own reckoning, what's his name again? Ivan Chistyakov. He's just a guy who happened to find himself with a job as a Gulag prison guard, and he couldn't let anybody know he was writing this, of course. Again, as bleak and hopeless as it gets. But what he didn't get a chance to appreciate, I don't think in his own lifetime, was that he's a good writer. Maybe you get the sense he didn't appreciate that about himself, and there may have been something in the introduction that says as much, but very poetic style, and it in a very natural seeming way. And you just feel all of his, everything he knows is real outside of the world in this frozen wasteland that he's yearning for, and that he knows as other people are experiencing elsewhere in the world. You can feel that coming off of him. And despite the hopelessness you endure, he endured, it's wonderful at the same time. In a way, I don't know how else to describe that. Spycraft Secrets. This is a British author, I believe. So it's about just techniques, spies in the during the Cold War and during World War II, and I think on up to through the 80s or 90s, whenever this was written, but focused more a little back further in time. Now, when I read history, and I read it just to know about it, but I also read it for pleasure, because I just want to know. I'm always thirsty for it. I know this is a common complaint, but when you pick up a history book and you often get a lineage of royalty and military events and the like. And yeah, it's good that we have that on record, but I want to know the perspective of your average person during a given time in a certain place. And I know up through relatively recently, that's not really something people could have done. They were busy with the call of the day, with staying alive, with finding something to eat, with not being tortured and arrested and whatever. Nobody's going to stop in the middle of that and say, oh, well, today was a beautiful day. The sun rose at 7 o'clock and I do this for my job. And so when you do get it, it feels extra special. And I say that because one example of that is Rice Bowl Women, writings by and about the women of China and Japan. Over 1,000 years of stories and memoirs that reflect the changing status and ongoing struggle of women in the Orient. There's that weird, ridiculous phrase. And it's nice. It's just nice to get it at so-called, you're probably tired of these already, aren't you? It's the second time I've used them. Average person's perspective. Like growing rice. Coming Alive, China After Mao. If any of you have seen the video I made about Jiang Zhixin, the woman who was in the Chinese Communist Party and who was tortured, and then, just like I said about Yvonne Kristchikov, her writing was really good. She was a poet, and she wrote. The Communist Party of China imprisoned her and tortured her daily for daring to speak out against Chairman Mao and point out how evil his wife was, who took particular pleasure in her torture, by the way. I forget her name, Mao's fourth wife, the one who was responsible for all the politicization of the arts in the 60s. Anyways, in researching that documentary, I came across this book, Coming Alive, China After Mao. And this is written by an American, I believe, either an American or British. Was he a television presenter or just a journalist? Anyways, Roger Garside. And so this is just what it is, Life After Mao. So late 70s. Brief, only, it turns out only a brief mention of Zhang Zhixin, but worth having because, again, it was something I knew as much about what was happening in China during the 80s as I did what was happening in Russia in the 80s. And it's the periods of transition in any culture tend to be the most interesting, and that's often when foreign visitors get to come in with a fresh perspective. And hopefully, when they do, they bring in a perspective of the subject there in what they're writing about, too. Anyways, up here, these are getting harder to get to, and I'm trying to keep my leg from going to sleep. So some of these books are written in Mandarin Chinese and Japanese. My grandmother and her husband moved recently into a retirement home, and he was in the Korean War, and he did not want his old Asian books, so I got boxfuls of them. I don't know what I'm looking at, but I know I'm keeping it because I know what it's been through and who it's been through that with. They're probably study materials. He had a lot of books that were English to Mandarin and English to Japanese and vice versa. Study and reference materials. This book here, I may end up reading. On my channel. So a lot of people are not finding out about this until kind of recently. If you are a fan of George Orwell's 1984 and Why Is It Failing Me? What's the other one that's always discussed side by side with that? Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. You need a book called We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. Put that title so you can see it and print yourself and pause it if you need to. Book is called We. This was a predecessor to both of those. Here, I'll read you the abstract from the back. Yevgeny Zamyatin, We, translated with an introduction by Clarence Brown. Ursula K. Le Guin has a quote here. She calls it the best single work of science fiction yet written. Set in the 26th century AD, Zamyatin's masterpiece describes life under the regimented totalitarian society of one state, ruled over by the all-powerful benefactor. Recognized as the inspiration for George Orwell's 1984, We is the archetype of the modern dystopia or anti-utopia. A great prose poem detailing the fate that might befall us all if we surrender our individual selves to some collective dream of technology and fail in the vigilance that is the price of freedom. Clarence Brown's brilliant translation is based on the corrected text of the novel, first published in Russia in 1988 after more than 60 years suppression. So now we're going to find, when was it originally published? First published in the English language in 1924. It had to be smuggled out on separate pieces of paper, smuggled out in parts. And he wouldn't get to appreciate a heavy readership until now. And that should not be. There is... Should I talk about that now? Yes, I will. And in my next video. On that subject of 84 and This and Aldous Huxley's book. This is another must. Yeah, I'm on the hardwood floor with you. Kallocaine by Karine Boy. This is another one I'm considering. I probably will read on my channel. So, again, the abstract here. A pioneering work of dystopian fiction from one of Sweden's most acclaimed writers. Written midway between Brave New World and 1984 as the terrible events of the Second World War were unfolding. So, yeah, while World War II was occurring. Kallocaine depicts a totalitarian world state which seeks to crush the individual entirely. In this desolate, paranoid landscape of police eyes and police ears, the obedient citizen and middle-ranking scientist Leo Kahl discovers a drug that will force anyone who takes it to tell the truth. But can private thought really be obliterated? Karen Boy's chilling novel of creeping alienation shows the dangers of acquiescence and the power of resistance, no matter how futile. So let me look. Publication date of this exactly. First published in Stockholm in 1940. The very fact that I'm mentioning it, I'll leave this with you, the title and the author. Put this back over here. Okay, so you want one of my favorite books of all time? Complete Works of Lao Tzu. Everyone needs this book. Some people say that about the Bible. If you want to experience, well, have a spiritual experience in the form of reading timeless poetry. And it is so much more than poetry. This is the heart and essence of Taoism. There is another book here. Yeah, Tao Te Ching and Hua Hu Ching. I have several translations of this. We don't need to go through them all. I guess I don't find one that there's not much variation. Exactly because it's such simple stuff. Very tightly packed here. The Arts of Japan, an illustrated history. So, painting and pottery, mostly. Anthology of Japanese Literature. If I can get this other book back in. From the earliest era to the mid-19th century. This is one of the old Chinese classics, Strange Tales from a Chinese studio. Here's Secret of the Golden Flower. I read that to you all. Hope you enjoyed it. Buddhist scriptures. I have two versions of The Tale of Genji by Lady Murasaki. A novel in 6 parts, translated from Japanese, of course. Tale of Genji. And, boy, that's another thick one, right? Look at that. Here's my other version, comes in box, 2 parts here. So the thing about this book, this may be another controversial thing to say. I don't know why it should be, though. This may be the first novel ever that existed, and it's by a woman, by a Japanese woman. We often, well, I don't know about you, I say we, have heard that that was the case with Don Quixote. Not so. So that's about 1,000 years old. I think early in the 11th century, so about the time of the real Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, this was being written. And it was written in an archaic language for a long time, until the 19th century, I think. You didn't really understand the book unless you understood this archaic language it was written in and knew the particulars of Japanese royal life. But there has been a translation in the 19th century. I think there were either errors with that or some presumptions made. And now, since then, we have as accurate a translation as you can get, as well as, I don't know if it's one of these two that I have or not, but there's at least one translation of this which is akin to the late 16th century version of the Bible that we have. So, you know how suddenly the language of the Bible, as it came out of England in the late, not 16th century, I meant 17th century because it's 1600s. Suddenly the language of the Bible is very flowery and really beautiful. Somebody gave this a similar treatment. I mean, I say flowery, but it was an honest treatment. It's still keeping the essence intact. But some of us just want as to the word as you can keep it. And again, some of us want every version. Mishima, Temple of the Golden Pavilion. Yukio Mishima, you may have heard of him, probably the most controversial Japanese author of the last century. All of his books are incredible, take you places very bluntly that you don't see coming, and what else do you want from fiction, you know? This book right here, get it out before I name it. Kobo Abe, The Woman in the Dunes. I keep pulling my glasses down because I want to see if the book is showing clearly without glare. I think the sun is gone from that window now. Kobo Abe, The Woman in the Dunes. When was this published? (1964). Wait a minute, it couldn't have been. Was it 64? Well, that means the movie version came out the very same year, because this is one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time. And another, I believe I commented on this before, sometimes the movie is as good as the book or even better. This is one of those cases. I remember I loved the book, but I could not tell you right now what the similarities or differences were. But the movie is, in fact, I reviewed it on my Rare and Obscure Films Volume 1 video. And I know I said in there that it is pure 60s art house cinema. And it is. Very mythical feel to it. Somewhat minimal dialogue, but I recommend it to anybody. Not a movie to go to if you're inclined towards action and need to have something happening all the time. It's a very patient movie, requires your patience. Okay, so the novel idea I was telling you about, where the framework stories in Siberia in 1953. One of the places we go in that story is to Shanghai, between World War II and the Korean War. So that's early 40s through early 50s. This book does something very interesting. The city of Shanghai figures in my story, and I'm very, very drawn to the city of Shanghai and just knowing everything I can about it at that time. Um, that's the thing about researching for what you write is it opens up some doors and makes you interested in things even if you weren't writing about it. Shanghai between in the 1930s and somewhat during the 1940s was like San Francisco in the late 1800s, and or like Vegas now. This book, City of Devils, Paul French, the two men who ruled the underworld of old Shanghai. It uses those two men that the title's alluding to as an anchor to tell you all about the city and the activity there. But what's so much fun about it, it's written in the style of the way you hear people talk in that transatlantic dialect of 1940s movies, that crime noir kind of thing. It's the prose is in that style. It makes it kind of fun to go through. It makes you feel like you're there. I'm sorry about all the coughing. Alexander Pushkin. This might be Russia's most beloved author. Complete prose fiction. So there was this. He is given the credit for opening up Russian literature in the 19th century. They say it starts with him and his work. And I know him by a few works only. I have not read anything that is in this collection. So I have some other things here. I don't know if we need to pull them out or not. The USSR, A Concise History, just an overview of the USSR while it was the USSR. This here, KGB, The Inside Story. I was told that is everything you'd want to know about the KGB and all of their secret activity. How it began, the different names it had throughout its history, its evolution, there's the dreaded air quotes again, evolution of the KGB. By name, where they existed, how they operated, everything. I've read part of it, and I had to stop because I had some things going on. I wanted to just come back to it and start over when I can just get obsessive and dig in. Commissar, this is the story of Lavrenti Beria. He was one of, maybe you can call him Joseph Stalin's right-hand man, but he was really just one of them. Worst of the worst, as bad if not worse than Stalin. Of course, Stalin killed God knows how many people. Add to that, Beria was a pedophile, rapist. Those are words that YouTube doesn't like, but I hear people censoring themselves as they make videos, and they don't want to make reference to crimes that other people have made, and I see no reason to do that. Lavrenti Beria, and this was written by, interestingly, in a way, in novel form. So he's telling the facts as he knows them, but it reads like a novel. The perversion of knowledge, this is about scientific study and the manipulation of the results of scientific study as they were presented to the public and submitted for peer review in the Soviet Union. Pretty dark stuff, very, very technical, and I'm glad for that, but a lot of it was over my head. Here's another edition of what I refer to as one of my favorite books, Tao Te Ching. Any of you into Taoist literature, or you want to be, go here. In fact, I have another one. I always recommend two books for those interested in Taoism. Where are you, brother? Well, here it is. So, Lao Tzu, Tao Te Ching, and the Book of Chuang Tzu. In fact, it looks like I skipped over that. So, what is this? The Rite of Spring. This book is by Gillian Moore. That is about, let's get it out. Let's just get it out as I knock one behind the other books. The Rite of Spring, The Music of Modernity by Gillian Moore. It would have taken me a minute to get my thoughts around. I'll just read you the abstract again. On May 29th, 1913, a new ballet by Diaghilev's Ballet Russes received its premiere. However, when the curtain rose on a cast of frenziedly stamping dancers, to an accompaniment of pounding chords on the strings, a near riot erupted, ensuring that the events of the evening would enter the mythology of artistic modernism. As well as exploring the cultural climate that created the Rite of Spring and narrating the drama of this most notorious of first nights, Gillian Moore analyzes the music of the rite itself in thrilling detail, explaining how a scandalous novelty of 1913 became one of the most influential musical works of the modern era. And what's so interesting about this, I'm not looking for a publication date, hang on. Oh, it's older than I thought. So, if any of you know the composer Igor Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, the feel of it, we'll put it that way, people were not ready for, and it caused a riot, a literal riot at its premiere. The music, they complained, was too pagan, and anyways, one of the interesting background things happening here was the set designer, or one of them, who painted the backdrops for it was none other than Nicholas Roerich, who was Russian mystic and painter, traveled all over India and Asia, Middle East, the Near East, and made just amazing paintings. Traveled a lot with his wife. And so anyways, he has his own story you might look into in addition to this. Another one of my favorites, The Book of Tea by Kakuzo Okakura. Can you see the print? Now I have the glare of my ceiling light and my hands shaking the way I'm sitting. So I have here, that print is bigger and better. I have two editions of this. Very thin book. Like any Taoist books, especially the two I specified. Very simplistic language, beautiful writing. It was written late 19th century, when Western culture was coming into Japan for the first time, very, very rapidly. And this is from a man who's looking around, watching the culture, his culture, die all around him every minute. And again, it's just beautiful. There's nothing else to say about it. Leave it at that. I've got a lot of stuff. Let's see. One of them is just called German Expressionism, and another one here called From Caligari to Hitler. So, another thing related to my novel I'm working on goes back to the city of Dresden, which I have some things about the bombing of Dresden too. I have several books, so we'll leave it at that. I won't go into all that. I sort of rediscovered the German Expressionist films of the 1920s. And the book, if you're interested in it, the book German Expressionism is a good, broad overview of it. But the book From Caligari to Hitler, it shows the relationship between horror as a genre, whether in film or literature or just mythology, any way you want to look at it, the relationship between horror and art and its evolution in Germany, culminating in the film movement known as German Expressionism. Oh, it's juicy stuff. Should I let it be with this section? Did we cover everything I wanted to? Um, Korean history. We've been to Japan and China, but I can't explain it yet, but I have a very particular interest in Korea, probably even more so than China and Japan. I almost said Japan and China. Two history books here. Um, I think they're both written by Koreans. But when this kind of first took me over, I realized it's like, have I ever even seen any Korean history books anywhere? Because I'd like to know. And just as a matter of synchronicity, I was listening to a radio show. Was it Red Ice Radio? Somebody was talking about Korea and the Korean language in class in university. A young Korean man, and realized he couldn't find any just standard Korean history book written in English, and he said, "I'm going to write one," and he did. And I don't remember. He's one of these two people, so I found these both and got them. This is Korea, Old and New, a history. And did I see multiple authors. Kai Bak Lee, Young Ik Lu, Michael Robinson, Yu Som, Carter Eckert, Edward Wagner, Michael Robinson. The other one, so either the student was Kai Bak Lee, or, well, what do you know? I didn't even realize that. He was one of 5 authors on this book. He is the sole author on this one. A New History of Korea. So this is probably the one I was talking about. Don't hold me to that because I'm not sure. And what's an Asian collection without Tibetan Book of the Dead? Oh, yeah, maybe we're not done yet. So I had heard one of the people I love the most who kind of help awaken spirituality is Alan Watts. You've probably heard me say that before. He had mentioned an author and explorer named Alexandra David Neal before, and I found out he wrote an introduction to one of her books. And one of these books is about her, and I think the other 2 are by her. So, My Journey to Lhasa, the classic story of the only Western woman who succeeded in entering the Forbidden City, with a foreword by the Dalai Lama. So her story is worth knowing. And so you see the spelling of her name. It is Alexandra David Neal. It's spelled like David, but it's pronounced David. And this is the one, is it? This may be the one with Alan Watts's introduction, The Secret Oral Teachings in Tibetan Buddhist Sects. That's sects, S-E-C-T-S, not S-E-X. By Alexandra David Neal and Lama Yongden. And one more, Magic and Mystery in Tibet by Alexandra David Neal. I'm assuming you all can just pause wherever you need to. This is a fun one too. So I was talking about Shanghai in the 1930s. Hatchet Men by Richard Dillon. This is about the Chinese gangs in the San Francisco up to the 1906 earthquake. Somehow this also manages to be fun too. It reads like a Quentin Tarantino movie. I know, my book patterns are weird in here. If I showed you the whole room, this is kind of tucked away a little behind this shelf. So, this one, we'll get to the top shelf in the next video. And there's a reason for that, why we're skipping one back here too. You'll know in the next video. This is kind of a mix of novels and... Wait a minute, is this one all novels? Yeah, and some research. My viewers probably know the name of Graham Hancock. I've got several of his books down here. He helped to popularize ancient civilization, interest, new studies of it, no matter how you feel about him. He did a lot for that. Fingerprints of the Gods, Underworld, and more recently he's been writing novels. The book that so many people hate the author for, Salman Rushdie, The Satanic Verses. Awesome. The author and this book, you have to get it. So what was this? Was either 88 or 89. My favorite fiction author when I was in high school, I hate that I haven't peeled these stickers off yet. Clive Barker. And I discovered him, his horror short stories when he was writing just the more visceral, just pure horror stuff. I loved those. There were several collections in the early and mid 80s. And then when you get up to 1989, he published a book called The Great and Secret Show, where he mixed horror and fantasy. And I loved it so much. I thought, horror and fantasy mixed together. That's it. That's it. So, the books as far as that's concerned. As he started writing longer novels, he was doing that when he came out of the short stories. You have things like Great and Secret Show, Weave World, and in Magica, this is 2 volumes of it here. And it's great, beautiful stuff. I just, my attention's been taken over by other things. I know one of these days I'm going to return to horror, but I feel like when I do, it's going to be that kind of thing. Horror and fantasy mixed. So my Joseph Campbell is down here. I've read him to you before. The Hero with a Thousand Faces. That's another must-have. Anybody interested in mythology and writing, must-have. Joseph Campbell, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. I also have The Power of Myth, which was a PBS series, also worth watching. Complete Works of Edgar Allan Poe. This is a book probably about 100 years old called The Nile. And it's a pretty awesome sweep of history of surrounding the Nile in Egypt. And you wonder at that time, how do you know what you do? I mean, it's amazing what people have done to collect knowledge. Another good example of that is this, An African Survey. Look at the thickness of that. Check the date. Publication date of this. So this is a lot of geology and geopolitics and politics and history itself. First printed 1938. This second edition is 1945. Poet I used to be much more into than I am now. Charles Baudelaire, The Flowers of Evil. I just don't read that much poetry anymore. I enjoy hearing it when other people read it, but I'm very picky with it. And when I read poetry, there's another secondary voice in my imagination that's kind of going, come on, come on, come on, hurry up. We've got a novel to read. Come on. William Blake, Friedrich Nietzsche, Nietzsche, Charles Dickens, Hard Times, complete works of William Blake. One of my favorite novelists of all time. Is it worth pulling all these out? Maybe some of you remember the movie from the 80s, which was pretty good. It's just there was too much to encompass from the novel. First of all, I'll show you the length, the thickness of it. That is, what do we have here? This thing is 611 pages long. The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. So, if you're not familiar, Umberto Eco was an Italian professor of semiotics who would go back and forth between teaching and writing. He wrote a lot of essays. They're very highly regarded worldwide now, but his whole thing that attracted me, his prose, I don't know how it can feel so continuously natural, being that he is like a walking world history library. He is so syncretic. There's a good summarizing word for what he does. His stories are incredibly syncretic. It's always going to come back to that. He encompasses so much. This is I have to say basically, a murder mystery set in is it the late Middle Ages? I believe it's 14th. Is it 14th century or 13th? The year is 1327. Why not? We'll read this too. The place is a wealthy abbey. The year is 1327, and the crimes committed here are beyond the wildest imaginings. It will be the task of English brother William of Baskerville to decipher secret symbols and dig into the eerie labyrinth of abbey life to unravel the mystery. His tools: logic, intelligence, wit, and a ferocious curiosity. His enemy: a murderer with the awesome features of the Antichrist. If you haven't seen the movie made in 1985, or was it 86, with Sean Connery as the lead character, it's really good. It is really good, but obviously there is so much more in here. So he wrote this. Isn't my favorite? My favorite might be another novel called Foucault's Pendulum, named for Michel Foucault. And that one came out, I think, 89 or 90, maybe 91. He also wrote The Prague Cemetery and another book also set in, is this the Middle Ages too? Yeah, the Fourth Crusade, 1204, Baudolino. And it involves the mythical figure, some people won't agree with that, of Prester John. Another novel of his called The Island of the Day Before. And did I mention The Prague Cemetery? Somehow I do not have a copy of my favorite, which is Foucault's Pendulum. I think I lent it to a friend and never got it back. Some friend. No, that happened a lot. I borrowed books that I forgot I had, never gave back to people too. For all I know, it was the same person. All right, is that it for here? A collection of poetry from Jean Cocteau, and another work of his called Diary of an Unknown. The complete Kama Sutra, and for some reason I've decided to, I don't know why I find this funny, pile up on top of the Kama Sutra Works of Mark Twain. My organizational skills must have fallen off a cliff at that point. So there's not much need to go through Mark Twain. However, why do I have this? Is Mark Twain in it? Oh, Brave New World, American Literature from 1600 to 1840. So, short stories, multiple authors. Maybe not. Letters from the Earth. I won't go through any of these and publication dates and all that. Roughing It. It's about his journeys through the American West. This, not many people seem to know about still. He loved and revered Joan of Arc. He wrote this. This was originally serialized in the Saturday Evening Post, and it was only later, probably much, much later, posthumously put all together in novel form. But he did his best to put what we know of Joan of Arc in novel form. And it's awesome. It's great. One thing I do not have in print of Mark Twain, I think I have an ebook version of it, is, my God, I don't even remember what it was called. Just like Roughing It is his travels in the old American West. He had another giant book that somebody else may have co-authored with him about his travels throughout Europe. And anytime I hear the title mentioned, which again eludes me now for some reason, I immediately think of one of the parts where he's in Italy. So it's late 19th century Italy. And just because half my mother's side of the family is Italian, and I know about our history before anybody came to America, the chapter of Mark Twain's on Italy is called Wanted Soap. That just kills me. So here, let's turn this a little bit. Can we dim that light a bit? Is that sun going to be unavoidable? Maybe it is. That's okay. I'll do what I can to keep it out of your face. It's not really on mine, only in the monitor. It doesn't look anything like this. The actual sunlight coming in. These are more novels. Here, all the way across, everything Greek and Roman and Scandinavian. So I've got some of the medieval Icelandic and Norse works. And yeah, I will pull out examples. But for some reason mixed in here I have some of the Grail lore that belongs with my UK stuff, which is over there. So some of the medieval knight literature. And up here, some more novels. And then, pretty tall, huh? It just seems so from down here. Up there we have this big pile right here. This is all American, Native American history. I don't think any of it's in novel form. Up here, more novels. I think I reserved that second shelf down is novels I have yet to read. And on the top is some of the classics that I've read several times and I plan on doing again. You know what? I'm going to lift you higher so you can see this better. Is there anything I need to pull out here? I'll just mention some things. Marco Polo, Travels. Leaves of Grass, Walt Whitman. Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison. This guy wrote this, when was this, 50s or 60s? Wrote this great, what they call the great American novel, that phrase we keep hearing over and over again. This is the one I usually think of, and half the reason for that is he wrote this and then never wrote anything else. I mean, talk about, the idea that everybody has one novel in them, at least. It's like he got it out of his system and then that's it. Leaving everybody hungry for more. Milan Kundera. Albert Camus. Works of Maupassant, works of Kipling. I have a shredded, complete works of Shakespeare here, which I already showed you in my Rare Books Volume 1. I have a Civil War copy of complete works of Shakespeare I'm particularly proud of because it's in such excellent condition. So up here we have some 19th century and early 20th occultism. Some of it's people like this, P.D. Ouspensky. You can find a lot of bullshit mixed with some of it's earnest bullshit. I mean, some people are on the right track, but they have a few wrong ideas they can't help but interject in there. Some history about the Sumerians, ancient Near East. 2 books about Cleopatra here. One of them is The Murder of Cleopatra by Pat Brown. Another one is called Cleopatra by Stacy Schiff. And the director, Denis Villeneuve, who has done the recent version of Dune, is making that into a movie. So, all the people who want really bad to believe that Cleopatra was black, I'm so sorry, you are incorrect. We know for a fact that that's not true. Anyways, Denis Villeneuve has a track record of never making a bad movie. They're always either very good or very awesome. And so I'm looking forward to that, and I think you should too. Now I'm going to lift you higher so you can see the rest better. And I'm not going up and down. So, like I said, this is all the Old West. Not just the North America, this is the Americas, North, Central, and South. So, slavery in Brazil, the fruit companies who owned all the land in Central America. But a lot of it, most of this, what you see here is Native American history, according to, I wanted as much as possible from as many tribes as possible. Now, an area that I've been particularly interested in is the Reconstruction era. So after the Civil War ended, when slaves were free, and yet nobody would hire them or agree to educate them. And the absolute disaster that was Reconstruction, the things that supposedly went into law that were supposed to help people that did not, and in fact made life harder for everybody. Like I said, those periods of transition in history just fascinate me. So I have a couple works about that. The Black West, this is about some lives of actual black cowboys. Some of them were, the Buffalo Soldiers, they were called, some of them. Some of the mountain men who wound up acting as guides for newcomers to the West since they knew it so well. We Are Your Sisters, I think, black women in the 19th century. So I think this is a lot of letters written to and from slave households and memoirs written afterward. I have a lot of books about Oklahoma. Lucky enough to find some old maps of places that do not exist in any way anymore, some of them underwater now. This one about American Indian medicine. So I could just tell you the different, it's like you pick a tribe, and I probably have something about it, at least one. I have a lot of things about Indian medicine. Here's yet another thing about the era of Reconstruction. Story of Crazy Horse. The Indian Craft Book. More slave narratives. I thought I had something about Navajo weaving. Some of these books have some good artwork, good visual aid to show the unique types of clothing and crafts that were made. The Mustangs by J. Frank Dobie. It's about how horses came to America, running free from abandoned Spanish missions in Mexico. Just became wild, started running north and west. Nez Perce legend. Indians of the Plains. I have a feeling I have some more of these books that are not on this shelf that might not be here because they were bigger. We have, see the second shelf up there. We were talking about Alan Watts. I wanted to read that for you all, but turns out somebody already did. So I've used his voice in many of the tarot videos, the essence of tarot. Let me lift my microphone up too. So here's an Italian poet and novelist I discovered. The Castle of Crossed Destinies by Italo Calvino. Now, well, there's that glare again. I'll show you the title and the author. So he uses tarot to create a story. I will leave it at that. Books by the composer Richard Wagner. Here's all psychology stuff. Anybody interested in Carl Gustav Jung, Dr. Jung, don't start here. This is probably, maybe I shouldn't assume that. This may be, it's certainly one of his most, his densest books and most difficult. Why don't you give a shot pronouncing the title too? Mysterium Conjunctionis. Here, say that 3 times quickly. I've not read this, but probably pretty scary. I think this was published in the 20s. Just that fact, coupled with the title, Experiments in Psychology. More Alan Watts. This is the book that turned me on to him to begin with. I discovered this in the 90s at a thrift store, and I liked the cover art, and I took a chance on it. And I have probably said several times before, but Alan Watts is like a third grandfather to me. More psychology, techniques of persuasion, the kink and I, emotional problems of the student, meditation, journeys out of the body. So, we come to the shelf. Wow, you really cannot see the titles from there. Here's another title. Say it 3 times quickly. Hypnerotomachia polyphili. By Jocelyn Godwin. think that's a first translation. Translation many of us have been waiting for a long time. This is a treasure. Words of love and love of words in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So think Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Think anything in and around Florence, Italy. At the dawn of the 15th century, romantic literature, romance in art. Birth of the Chess Queen, a history by Marilyn Yalom. So how tracing history to show us how the queen wound up in the game of chess. Back in the flavor of Words of Love, the medieval romances. When the printing press first came around, this was the only thing there was as much a demand for as the Bible. The Romance of the Rose. Any student of or lover of medieval and Renaissance literature, this is a must. So it's about a dream, and it's a narrative poem, and I'll leave it at that because I should. This, I don't know why his works are not easily discoverable, why I had to search for it. Giordano Bruno, talk about a real saint. The Expulsion of the Triumphant Beast. I would say find anything you can, physical copy of anything you can by Giordano Bruno. Killed for asking questions, like the church loves to do. There's too much to say about this one, so I'll just recommend that you look into it, what it's about. The Alphabet versus the Goddess. The Conflict Between Word and Image. By Leonard Schlein. So, it's another juicy one. For those of you who love Chaucer's Canterbury Tales and Boccaccio's Decameron, as I do, this is a relatively lesser-known work, much lesser. Jan Potocki's The Manuscript Found in Saragossa. So, stories within stories within stories, and you might just go one further. As epic gets. History, occultism, romantic, poetic tales. Again, too much to say. Look into it. There is a film version of this that was made in the 60s, and in fact it might be French, which is just as good. It's just, of course, again, being a movie, you don't get as much as you do in the book, but it was really good. It was either French or Polish. Velikovsky, Immanuel Velikovsky, Oedipus and Akhenaten. So he was a scientist, but he was obsessed with history and ancient civilizations. And all people laughed at him in the 60s and 70s because he had some seemingly ridiculous things to say, some of the conclusions he arrived upon. But he has been proven correct in all of his predictions, but I think one or two. Someone who I've been rediscovering lately and feel a kinship with. For that reason, I read one of his short stories, which the only one I could not find anybody else had done so on YouTube. Franz Kafka. Kafka. This is, of course, Metamorphosis. I believe this is most well known, but The Trial is my favorite. It's for those of you who don't know, The Trial is about someone who's been arrested and brought to court, and no one will tell him what he's actually done wrong. Something a lot of people can relate to today. Well, throughout history, actually. So, Faust, Part 1. Got some other things you've heard of that you can commonly find on the shelves. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. I have not read this yet, but the author was recommended to me. Peter Ackroyd, Hawksmoor, British author. I believe he's British. Now this is something I may have to end up reading on this channel. I'm almost surprised I haven't yet. The Shepherd's Nosegay, Stories from Finland and Czechoslovakia. So some mythology and just tales. I think you all would enjoy it as much as I do. This was a by chance discovery, and I recommend it to everybody. The Life and Opinions of the Tomcat Moor by E.T.A. Hoffmann. This abstract we must read. O appetite, thy name is cat. With the herring head in my mouth, I climb to the roof like pious Aeneas. Tomcat Murr is a lovable, self-taught animal who has written his own autobiography. But a printer's error causes his story to be accidentally mixed and spliced with a book about the composer Johannes Kreisler. As the two versions break off and alternate at dramatic moments, two wildly different characters emerge from the confusion. Murr, the confident scholar, lover, carouser, and brawler, and the moody, hypochondriac genius Kreisler. In his exuberant and bizarre novel, Hoffmann brilliantly evokes the fantastic, the ridiculous, and the sublime within the humdrum bustle of daily life, making The Life and Opinions of the Tomcat Murr, written between 1820 and 22, one of the funniest and strangest novels of the 19th century. I concur. Anthea Bell's lively and humorous translation is accompanied by an introduction by Jeremy Adler discussing Hoffmann's life and career, his place in German Romantic literature, and the writers he influenced, the unusual structure of the novel, and the very different personalities of Murr and Kreisler. This edition also includes further reading and notes. Fun stuff. You want to dive into some mythology, something that feels very mythological, but have fun with it? I am considering reading this one for you all too. Matter of fact, I have 2 copies of it. I'll probably do a giveaway. And we come to the top. Yeah, I don't expect you to see these. I have showed you in my rare, one of the volumes of the rare books video, the Arabian Nights, the original, unabridged, uncut, unedited, however you want to put it, Arabian Nights books by Sir Richard Burton. 3 3 big books, I believe, in a box set about this big. This is the abridged version. I have 2 copies of the wildest book written before the 19th century. Rabelais. Gargantua and Pantagruel. I don't know how to describe this. Rabelais was a monk, a copyist who was copying and translating old books. And this, God knows why he wrote this, but thank God that he did, because it's insane. Aleister Crowley loved this book. I'm going to recommend it without any explanation, because there may not be one. Of course, Dante's Divine Comedy, and I would like further editions of Don Quixote. This one was produced in the 1960s. And you know what really frustrated me about reading Les Miserables, and I love the look of this book, and I love this book. Look at that. See the thickness? I read this version. I'm glancing, make sure my books don't fall. This is 630 pages. Already seems big enough, right? I read this, and then I found out I'm going to get you a page count here. 1,468 pages. So now that's, some of that is introductory material, but mostly it's story. Time to reread, huh? Makes me wonder what was cut and why, because what makes me so frustrated about, well, we'll get there. Let me get on to his other novel. Victor Hugo, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I love this book so much. I love it more than Les Miserables. Some people, and this is so frustrating to me, support. There is an edition of this book, not this one that I have. I don't think it's this one. There's an edition of the book where they cut out an entire chapter. Now, the entire chapter is a long description of the cathedral, and that's all it is. But you have to bear in mind, the original true title of the book is The Cathedral of Notre Dame, not the hunchback of it. The book is about the cathedral. The hunchback is a character in it. The cathedral is also the main character of the story. The building is treated as a character. And people support the removal of this chapter because they say, oh, well, in this day and age, we can look online and see pictures of the interior, of any part of the interior that we want. We don't need to have somebody describe it. Well, yes, you do. In the context of the story, yes, you do. Described in the particular way that it is. Make sure... In conclusion, for both books, Les Miserables, and you may still find it under the title The Hunchback of Notre Dame, but it needs to be called The Cathedral of Notre Dame. Make sure in either case you're getting an unabridged, unedited version. There, I have preached. Voltaire, Candide, fun, classic, 18th century. So much fun. Recommended to all. Okay, another one of my favorite books. Can I do this without tipping my microphone? We'll see. Another one of my favorite books. This is one of those desert island picks. We'll put it this way. If I could choose 5, this is certainly in it. If I could only choose 1, this might be it. And at the moment, I have 3 copies of it, and that is The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Here's her psychedelic 60s version of that cover art. Here's your straight up Penguin Classics classy copy, and probably the thickest. Here comes your another controversial statement. This one I know it is. And I'm going to die on this hill. You ready? Geoffrey Chaucer, with his Canterbury Tales, plagiarized, not was inspired by, plagiarized Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron. I don't say that because they both worked with a framework story, with a bookend story, where you have a group of people who are together and know they're going to be together for a long time, so start telling each other stories. Some of the particular stories themselves. Where's the proof, they say? Well, here's the proof. And I have the Canterbury Tales here too, I just didn't pull it out. The proof is, read one and then immediately read the other. There you go. UK history. Ireland, Scotland, England, Wales, Celtic stuff, Anglo-Saxon stuff, anywhere you want to go back in time, whatever culture. The Picts, along with some Masonic stuff. I have Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, two volume book of Scottish Masonry here. And yeah, we'll have a look. I won't just tell you. James Joyce, of course, Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, both. You know what, I confess, I considered reading aloud to you Finnegan's Wake. Exactly because it would be a challenge, but I would do some heavy editing because he makes up a lot of words, at least as you see them in print. The whole thing about it is the joy in reading James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake is in reading it aloud, because certain things that look like gibberish and nonsense, once you hear it aloud, you're saying actual words and actual phrases. But he changes his style and sometimes does not use punctuation. He's among the most creative authors, and there's a reason for it. I may do that one day. I may. So, yeah, in early Irish myths, I read part of this for you all. The Serpent and the Goddess, Women, Religion, and Power in Celtic Ireland. I think about 10 years ago I read that, some highlights from it. For my occultist historian viewers, this goes heavily recommended. The Mysteries of the Great Cross of Henday, Alchemy and the End of Time. Some of my viewers have discussed this in the comments section too. I don't remember which video. You're going to find yourself engrossed in that, I assure you. Scottish lore and folklore. Book of Irish Verse. You can't have a collection like this without Irish poetry. I have a lot of stuff about the real Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. It's another story I'm working on off and on, is a story that focuses on Lady Macbeth. Sort of behind and in between the scenes of the play. Periods in Highland history. What is this? I don't even remember. By Oak, Ash, and Thorn. Modern, probably something I'm not interested in anymore. Modern Celtic shamanism. As time goes on, I'm all the more careful about what people write about Druidry. And I found one that, if you want a book about Druidry and you don't know where to start, there's one I recommend, that The Facts as We Know Them, without embellishment or presumption, simply called The Druids, by Peter Beresford Ellis. So I have some more, but have some questions, you know. Some assumptions seem to have been made. Have some giant Irish history books here my grandmother gave me. I have also read some highlights from this. I went as I read this. I took a whole lot of notes and read some highlights that went on the theme of art criticism. Now we come to medieval books. Is this all? Okay, so this is medieval England. I need to broaden that a bit. Medieval through 17th century England. Two volumes. Late Middle Ages, the 12th century Renaissance, medieval English literature, daily living in the 12th century. What were we talking about earlier? So, based on the observations of Alexander Neckham in London and Paris by Urban Tigner Holmes Jr. Have to love that cover. You have to. I said you have to. If you don't love it, you're going to bed without supper. Books about the Black Death, the Great Plague, the first time it came around. Renaissance of the 12th century. I have not read this yet, but I'm sure. Now, this is not just British. This is just the Renaissance of the 12th century. That they go into Knights Templar. And the fact that they ran like hell back to Europe from the Holy Land with some very important knowledge. This was a really interesting one. Rosamond Tuve, Elizabethan and Metaphysical Imagery. So just going through some, like the title says, offering examples. Renaissance Magic and the Return of the Golden Age, the Occult Tradition and Marlowe, Johnson, and Shakespeare. Satanism and Witchcraft, the classic study of medieval superstition. Believe it or not, this is fun too. It's horrific and horrifying, but it's fun. You can imagine why, just in the way it makes fun of the people who assumed all of this. History of Medieval Civilization, History of the Goths. Now this is an 80s, I believe, complete Shakespeare. Again, my most prized collection of stories is in that 1865 version I showed you. If you haven't seen it, it's worth watching again. Go look up my rare books. Just type that in on my videos and you'll see it. But this one I love. This was the first collection of Shakespeare plays I owned. My dad got it for me when I was a teenager. That much I remember, as in my mid-teens. And the reason I still love this is for that, and I love this type of art. It reminds me of, who was that? There was a sketch artist and painter around the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. You seem to see all his artwork seemed to be in every other book at the time. But I want to show you some examples of just how lovely this is. Pull my glass down, see if I can. I think that's showing clear, right? And there's a lot of this with every play. Now, you get the point. I could go on forever showing you this stuff. This examines Shakespeare, the Evidence, Unlocking the Mysteries of the Man and His Work by Ian Wilson examines the case for every person that, it's like Team Shakespeare, Team Bacon, and Team Earl of Oxford. It's showing the evidence for all sides. All the claims made that Shakespeare is really somebody else other than Shakespeare. I have several books about the Great Fire of London in 1960s. In 1666. Yet another story I have in mind, something that's going to happen while that fire broke out. And I'm so surprised that we know as much as we do about what happened down to the details as the fire broke out and spread for 3 days over the entire city, almost the entire city of London in the year 1666. So, how's this for a title? By Permission of Heaven, the true story of the Great Fire of London. And I have some more, but you get the idea. We don't need to pull everything out. So, up above, where are we now? We're here. Some Egyptian stuff here, Egyptian Book of the Dead, which was an English translation for A.E. Wallace Budge. The true title of that book is actually The Book of Coming Forth by Day. Very interesting book. Women in Islam, from medieval to modern times. Something you don't really hear about often. That's why I bought this by chance when I saw it in the store. First Templar Nation by Freddie Silva, How 11 Knights Created a New Country and a Refuge for the Grail. That country is Portugal. Those of you interested in Grail lore and Knights Templar stuff need this too. I won't lay out the theory for you. Somebody presents a theory as to why the events that occurred that were led by Joan of Arc happened. So I'll just leave you with the title and the author. The Maid and the Queen, The Secret History of Joan of Arc by Nancy Goldstone. So some things about the Holy Land and archaeology there. Hiram Key, The Ottoman Centuries. This is a great history book for those of you interested in the history of the Ottoman Turks. This is gives you what you expect in history books with, royal lineage and all that basic facts about them, but also you do get depictions of daily life and the relationships with the outer world. So that's The Ottoman Centuries, Rise and Fall of the Turkish Empire by Lord Kinross. Rosicrucian Enlightenment, Francis Yates. So, this book, Rosalind, Guardian of the Secrets of the Holy Grail, written by Tim Wallace Murphy and Marilyn Hopkins. Tim Wallace Murphy died kind of recently. He was a Mason and absolutely honest, earnest historian. Sometimes you just kind of realize that and you can't explain why, and you just trust. Like what I was saying about Alan Watts, I felt about this man. So this is about the Grail construction in Rosslyn, the Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. Very much a Templar structure, and the way why it was built the way it is, and what may be hidden in at least one of its inner pillars. Vanished Library, A Wonder of the Ancient World. So, very quick read, you'll breeze through that, about the Library of Alexandria. What am I looking at? Oh. So this too. You'll breeze through this one despite the fact that it's thicker. The Fourth Crusade. As far as I'm concerned, the most interesting crusade. The Fourth Crusade and the Sack of Constantinople by Jonathan Phillips. The events of that crusade. Insane. This would make a great movie. And you would have to do it without having main characters. You would need a constant overview of everybody involved and the large-scale events. One bad decision after another, after another, after another. I mean, to the point where it's almost a sitcom. What's stopping me here? That is my small books. I don't know how any of you feel about the author Lawrence Gardner. Lost Secrets of the Sacred Ark, Realm of the Ring Lords, Bloodline of the Holy Grail. I recommend him. I'll tell you that much. It is history blended with speculation. Some people don't appreciate that. I want the speculation in the same way that I want information and questions from people I already know I do not disagree with. I'm sorry, that I already know that I do disagree with, because I want to hear what everybody has to say, unlike what YouTube wants us to have. I talked about the books by David Wood, an engineer, Gen Isis, and I used information and the cover art from that in my Tarot's Essence of Tarot's Priestess video. Gen Isis, spelled exactly like that, Genesis, first book of Revelations. Phenomenal book. Comes with maps he made himself. While investigating, picking up the trail of researching the life of, what was his name, in southern France, suddenly found himself very wealthy, found the cave underground. Suddenly, rich, famous people were showing up and wanting to go down there with him. And he built churches to Mary Magdalene all of a sudden. And there's been all kinds of I'm trying to summarize so much information right now, and I don't have the words for it. Let's just say they're terrestrial tattoos that have made it through time, that he's managed to show us, that others have picked up on since then. Can we see the higher one? Is that sundown enough? So, Spanish and Latin American history and fiction. And then, just by location, we merge into Mayans, Incans, Aztecs, Toltecs, Zapotecs. And then onward is Italian, Renaissance, medieval Italian, and Etruscan history. Is that it? Does that work as... Do we need to pull out any examples here? One work of fiction. I think it was in my movies about witches review video. I talked about the movie Like Water for Chocolate. The book. Read the book. She goes into detail with the actual recipes. And it's going to make you want to dive into something Latin American immediately. Good stuff. I know that I often call Central and South America, the new archaeology, because it's the stuff we've had less time to explore and study. And we, Westerners, those of us who haven't lived generationally from there and of that culture, there's a lot to look into. And if you want something that sort of looks at it all at once, so in the same way that Robert Bauval and people like that and Graham Hancock look at Egypt and India and places around there in terms of their relationship with astronomy and astrology and cosmological ideas. If you have the same interest in those combined subjects with Central and South America, you might start here. Maya Cosmos, 3,000 years on the shaman's path. So, it's about the culture, the archaeology, current and past, and the relationship with heavenly bodies, the stars. Ooh, this one heavily inspired me. I'm running on 2 hours here, really? The Mayan Factor, Path Beyond Technology by Jose Arguelles. You're going to want that. All my occultist friends and viewers, you're going to want this. The visual stuff in here too. Priceless stuff. Harmonic resonance is a key theme, and he relates numbering system the Mayans used with the I Ching. There's a lot of visual stuff like this in here with the juicy information. This is in 1987 too. Italy and Etruscan history. I'll leave it at that. Etruscan civilization. Oh, Crete. Ancient Crete and Knossos. Some people might say Knossos, like some people say Neanderthal instead of Neanderthal. Civilization in Renaissance Italy. Is this another Giordano Bruno? No. City of the Sun, a poetical dialogue, an Italian work by Tommaso Campanella. So that was that during the Renaissance? This is probably 15th century. When was this? Well, this version is 81. When was it first published? Well, I won't make you wait for it. It doesn't say in the introductory pages. Well, the author lived 1568 through 1639, so somewhere late 16th century, or very early 17th. And you know what? We're almost done here. Matter of fact, in my recommended occult and pagan history books to newcomers to the subjects, I probably went through half of these. Now, I know you cannot see those from down there, so I'll bring them down. For my little glass horse up here, I guess you can't see that either. All of these are tarot books. So about half of them came with tarot decks. Some of them I bought separately. 3 of them are devoted to Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot. And I know some of you are cringing right now probably because I pronounced it Thoth instead of Thoth. But I don't care. It's worth saying again. May not be, you know what? Yes, it is for the beginner as well as the seasoned user. This is for anyone interested in tarot. The Underground Stream by Christine Payne Towler. Esoteric Tarot Revealed. This is everything. Look how thin that is too. Really, this is summarized history and all the attributions The astrology, the astronomy, the relation to the tree of life, everything. For so many reasons, this is my go-to that I would recommend to anybody who wants to thoroughly understand it, because this is everything, and you'll find yourself taking notes and wanting to reference other books. That's why I have it at the end of the tarot section. So, Chinese astrology, 2 versions of the I Ching. The complete I Ching. One of them is a Taoist take on I Ching. Did I just say Taoist? Because it's Tao. You say it as if it's a D. Wow. I haven't actually said that out loud in a long time, and when I do, I mispronounced it. The Golden Bough by Sir James Fraser. Oh, covering up his name. This was a go-to reference for anybody who wanted to learn about world cultures and mythology for a long time. I won't go through the ones that I went through. I would, in that video, I would recommend you go back and to the, did I call it occult book recommendations for newcomers? Something like that. Pagan Europe. Yeah, I'm remembering all these from that. I have 3 books by Raven Grimassi about Italian witchcraft and the strega, just Italian for witch. Several books by H.P. Blavatsky, one of which I read highlights from. I think it was Isis Unveiled. This one I have not got to yet. Please don't fall down. And I'm so interested in it. Mary K. Greer, creator of one of the more famous relatively recent tarot decks. Mary K. Greer, look at the thickness of this, wrote, "Women of the Golden Dawn, Rebels and Priestesses." I'm pretty sure anybody still watching this video is going to want this. I don't know if I even owned this whenever I made that video. John Dee, for those of you who are interested in Elizabethan magic and John Dee and Edward Kelly, John Dee's 5 Books of Mystery, original source book of Enochian magic by Joseph H. Peterson, from the collected works known as Mysteriorum Libri Quinque. And now that I say that, I am aware I heard it sounded like kinky. And now that we've surpassed the 2-hour mark, oh my God. Goddess love you if you're still with me. This is it. Up here. Reference stuff. We don't need to go through most of these. My thesaurus. English to Italian to Japanese to Mandarin Chinese to Korean to Spanish to French to Latin to German, you name it. Even Irish Gaelic and Scots Gaelic, both separately. Giant dictionaries, and I think I showed you the Encyclopedia of Tarot. I have the first 2 volumes, so I believe there's 2 more, 3 and 4, which the second one is the hardest to find, and I got that way overpriced, but I really wanted it. I have some, we don't need to pull those out either, do we? Historical atlases. Atlas of World War II, you see all the town names and where the events were at what times. Historical maps book of Europe of all time, and historical atlas of Central America, which I was particularly interested in because I know relatively little about Central American history, seeing the town names, 100 plus years ago really helps. I think I should end it there. Be glad I'm not taking you out to look at all the cookbooks. Thank you so much, everybody. I've meant to do this for a long time, and I've not forgotten. I intentionally skipped one section over here. We're going to come back to that in the next video, and in that I will tell you why I've done that, why it deserved its own video, and some things happening in life related to that, also related to the new channel I have created. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care, everybody.